The 2019 Aspiration Index surveyed over 1,800 men and women in the age group of 22 to 45 across 12 cities in India. The objective of the survey was to understand the aspirations of India from a perspective of personal finances. Of the 25 goals listed, the biggest aspiration of India was to buy a home. And this is not a new aspiration. The oft-quoted line, "Roti, kapda or Makaan," was made popular in the 1960s as a part of the election campaign being run then. The idea was to identify the basic necessities which will help win an election campaign, and at that point in time it was food, clothing and shelter or a makaan. This line of "Roti, kapda or Makaan" was immortalized in the film by the same name in 1974. In the past few decades, a number of movies have been released that reflect upon the importance of achieving the goal of calling a home your own. A movie which reflects this emotion really well is Ghosla Ka Ghosla. Now you may be wondering, why am I talking about movies in a course on personal finance? The reason being, movies very closely reflect the reality of life. Overcoming the challenges of buying your first home can be a daunting task, and the emotions of having achieved this goal can be overwhelming. There are a number of reasons why you would want to buy a house. It can be personal, it can be family reasons, it can be society reasons, or the reasons can be purely aspirational for buying a home that you can call your own. If you think of the reason as to why you want to buy a house, the reasons can be many. You may want to buy a house because it gives you the self-confidence which is driven from the fact that you have a place of your own. You may want to buy a house not just for yourself but also for your family. Another reason for buying a house can be to fulfill the dream of your parents if they never had a house of their own. You may want a place because you want a corner on the face of this earth which you can call your own, and a place where you will be completely undisturbed. You may want to buy a house purely so that you start saving on the rental expenses which you have to incur if you don't have your own house. One large reason for buying your own house is so that you have the security of a roof over your head and you're not dependent on the landlord to whom you have to pay a rent on a monthly basis. This security plays a large factor in driving our decision towards buying a house. While I can go on giving you reasons as to why you should buy your own house, how you go about achieving this goal is equally important. And that is exactly what we are going to assist you through the duration of this course. Buying a house is the biggest financial decision that you will take in your lifetime, and it is going to have a lasting impact on your finances, not just your current finances but also your future finances. The milestone of buying your house is as important as passing college or getting married. What has changed in the past few decades is the role the financial institutions play in helping us achieve our goal of buying the house. A home loan accelerates your decision making because today a bank or a housing finance company is willing to lend up to 80% of the value of your house. That means just by putting an upfront payment of 20%, you are ready to move into your own home. At the same time, this also means that you're taking on yourself a liability which you promise to repay over a long period of time, which can be 20 to 30 years depending on the tenure of the loan that you take. And given how expensive homes are in the metros or some of the large and popular cities and towns, when you make a decision to buy a house, you are making a decision to lead a less abundant life for a long duration of time. So in addition to money, the decision to buy the house requires a lot of willpower and motivation. Someone rightly said, if you don't love your job, take a home loan. You will start loving it. Now it's up to you whether you want to take this in a light manner or this is something serious to think about. Because of the financial implications of buying the house, the commitments that need to be made, not just in the form of the down payment, but also in the form of the EMI payments that you have to make for the next 20 to 30 years to service the loan that you are taking to buy the house. Today's millennial generation have a slightly different view about buying the house. There is this constant debate of, should I make such a large commitment towards buying the house, or can I stay on rent and have a surplus cash flow in my hand and actually lead a slightly more luxurious, cash-rich less responsible life today than committing such huge amount of finances towards buying the house. There is this constant tussle of spending the money today for instant gratification and avoiding taking a home loan and the responsibilities that come with home ownership. And given that every personal finance decision is personal in nature, there is no right or wrong answer. And as always, our objective is to present you with the various factors that you must consider before you make a decision. And that exactly is going to be the first point of discussion as to whether you must buy a home or you can live off rent all your life. When you think about whether you should buy a home or whether you should consider continuing to live on rent for an extended period of time, there are a number of questions that you would come across. These are the questions you may ask yourself or you may ask each other if you are a couple today and deciding whether you want to move to a place you can call your own or you want to consider staying in a rented place. Can we continue to live on rent all our lives? And if yes, how much is it going to cost us? Will I save more by living on rent or will I save more by buying a house? Does renting free up more cash flows compared to having a EMI payment? And if I do not buy a house, how do I manage when I reach my old age and I do not have a roof over my head? So there can be a number of questions that you may have. Let's look at the pros and cons of buying versus renting. The biggest benefit buying a house gives you is stability in life. What do you mean by stability is when you buy a house, you consciously choose to reside in a particular area, in a particular society or community. And when you have bought a place there, that is going to be your place of residence for the next 20-30 years. And that is where you will build your connections. That is where you will build your extended friends and family. And that is the place which kind of becomes a launch pad for you. Just to think of it, if you are somebody from a small town and you've moved to a metro city like Delhi or Bombay, and eventually you spend a larger part of your life working and you will end up buying a house there. That house, when you buy, that becomes your permanent place of residence, which earlier was maybe a small town that you came from. And tomorrow when your kids grow up, for them, their home base is going to be Bombay and not your earlier hometown. So buying a house gives you a lot of stability, which is not the case when you are constantly renting a place, which you may have to change every 2 to 3 years if you're lucky, or maybe lesser number of times. When you rent a place, the rent that you pay is purely an expense that goes out of your pocket. Whereas if you're buying the place on a home loan, which is the default we will assume all through our discussions in this course, the EMI that you pay consists of two components, that is an interest portion and a portion which is a repayment of the loan, which is nothing but an investment that you're making into your own house. One of the most popular reasons for buying a house is the tax benefits associated with it. So if you're renting a house, generally you would get a tax benefit in the form of HRA, which becomes tax-free for you. If you decide to buy the house, you get higher tax benefits in the form of deductions for the principal that is paid, as well as deductions for the interest that you pay to the financial institution on a periodic basis. However, the recent changes made by the government in the tax laws have reduced the tax benefits available for you as an individual, and to that extent, buying a home purely for the tax benefits associated with it has become less attractive. When you rent a house, the rent that you pay to your landlord, you should budget and you should expect it to increase every year. The average you look at is anywhere between 5 to 6%, at which you would expect the rent to increase. Obviously, places which are more popular or more in demand, the kind of rent increase that they see is at 10% per year. Whereas when you buy the house, the EMI that you need to pay to your banker remains fixed, except in the case of floating rate loans, where you will see a fluctuation in your EMI as the interest rates change. When you are paying a rent to the landlord, there is no end date to when you can stop paying the rent, because you're going to pay the rent forever. Versus when you take a home loan to buy your house, it comes with a tenure of 20 or 25 years, and that is the tenure after which the house becomes yours and you no more have to make any payment either towards the home loan EMI or towards the rent, because the house is yours at the end of the 20-year tenure of the loan. Another benefit of buying a house is that today you can move into a house which is sufficient for your requirements, and after a period of 15 years or 20 years, if you feel the need of moving into a bigger house, you can always use the existing house that you have as a starting point, because that will help you move into a larger house, as it will fund the major part of the new house that you want to move into. Let's dive into a real life scenario to evaluate the renting versus buying decision. For this, we will introduce our two states couple, which is basically an example of a couple where both the husband and wife are working and contributing towards the finances of the family. In our example of the two states, we have Krish, who is a banking professional, whereas we have Ananya, who does a marketing job at a FMCG. Both of them have been working for the last 3 years and got married a year back. Both of them contribute towards the finances of the house. They earn an amount of 1 lakh each and currently are staying in a rented property in Bangalore, wherein they are paying a rent of 30,000 per month. Given that they've been working for the last 3 years, they are contemplating whether they should buy a new home so that they can stop incurring the rent expense. If you look at their cash flows, both of them are earning an amount of 1 lakh rupees per month, and they're contributing 60% of the amount towards their expenses, which amounts to 1.2 lakh per month, which consists of rent, utility, travel and other expenses. And the balance 40,000 per month is what each of them save, totaling a saving of 80,000 per month for the family. Total expense of 1,20,000 per month. They are paying a rent which is equal to an amount of 30,000 each month. Since they've been working for the last 3 years and they've been a very diligent saver, they've managed to save an amount of 47 lakhs, which is invested across fixed deposits, mutual funds and their provident fund account. And they do have certain investments in both debt as well as equities. While this gives a basic profile of the couple, which I'm sure many of us can relate to in our real lives, the question that Krish and Ananya face today is, should they continue to stay on a rent of 30,000 per month, which they expect to increase at the standard inflation rate of 6%, or should they consider buying a house? If they decide to buy the house, they expect the house to cost them an amount of 1.25 crores, of which they'll have to put up a payment of INR 25 lakhs towards the down payment of the house, and the balance 1 CR will be funded by a bank, which will convert into a monthly EMI of 80,000 rupees per month. Let's keep aside the emotions that are associated with buying a new house or moving into your dream home or calling a place as your own, and let's purely look at the numbers for a while to help us understand whether renting or buying a house is a more sensible solution. To help you understand these numbers better, the two options of renting a place versus buying a place, let's lay out the various factors that you will expect if you go down both these paths. In both the cases, we assume a tenure of 20 years to understand the financial position today and what would be your financial position after 20 years if you choose to stay on rent versus if you choose to buy a house. So it's clear that if I choose to stay on rent for the next 20 years, I will have to pay a rent of 30,000 per month, and I can expect my rent amount to increase at the rate of 6% every year. Versus if I decide to buy the house, then my rental of 30,000 per month is replaced with an EMI, which is an amount of 80,000 per month. And this EMI is fixed every year. It is not going to increase year on year, unlike my rent amount. In addition to the monthly payouts, when I decide to rent a place, I am expected to put front a deposit amount which is generally equal to 3 to 4 times of rent. And in our example, this will amount to a deposit of say 1 lakh rupees. Versus when I decide to buy the home, I will have to make a down payment equal to 20% of the value of the house. And in our example, that amounts to INR 25 lakhs, which is 20% of 1.25 crores, which is the value of the house in which Krish and Ananya are currently staying, and they are considering whether they should go ahead and buy the house instead of continuing to incur the rent expense. So when I compare renting versus buying, under the renting option, I have a saving in my cash flows of an amount of INR 50,000 per month because my rent is 30,000 versus my EMI being 80,000. In addition to that, I don't have to put forward any money towards a down payment and have again a saving in my cash flows to the extent of 25 lakhs today because I am not buying the house, I am going to continue to stay on rent. Now, if you were to fast forward this to 20 years later and you would want to compare as to whether you are better off renting or better off buying, for that we will have to make a certain set of assumptions that whatever money you save or whatever cash flows that you save, because your renting results in a lower cash flow versus buying, you are able to invest that money. So today your savings from renting is 50,000 per month, but every year you will see that your rent amount will keep increasing. So your savings from that rent are going to reduce progressively. But having said that, you have a saving of 50,000 per month, which is going to decrease year on year, but you have that saving which is available for you to invest today. In addition to that, you have a down payment of 25 lakhs which you did not have to make since you decided to stay on rent. So if you continue to invest these amounts diligently every year over a tenure of 20 years, you will land up with a certain corpus from these savings. For again the sake of simplicity, we've assumed that you can expect a return of savings of 10% when you invest this money. If you go to the other side of the table, when you decide to buy the house, what you have got is obviously a higher amount of payout in terms of down payment, EMIs, but in return you are getting a house which has a value of 1.25 crores today. And like most residential real estate properties, we assume that the home value is going to increase at a rate of 5% per annum for the next 20 years. So given these two scenarios of renting versus buying, how do you think these two would be stacked up when you look at both of them at the end of 20 years? So in these two scenarios, when I rent, I save an additional 50,000 per month, plus I also save the 25 lakhs. So this is the amount which I will have surplus in my hand, which I can invest at the rate of 10% per annum for the next 20 years. Versus when I buy the house, I have bought a house which is worth 1.25 crores today, and like most residential properties, I would assume that the value of this house is going to grow at a rate of 5% per annum for the next 20 years. So given these two options, how do these two guys stack up after 20 years? The down payment of 25 lakhs when invested at a rate of 10% per year for the next 20 years grows to a corpus of 1.68 crores. Whereas the savings of 50,000 per month that you're having, which will progressively decrease as your rent amount goes up, if all of that is invested diligently for the next 20 years, it stacks up to a saving of 2.33 crores. That means the total saving that you will have by renting a place and investing that amount saved in financial instruments amounts to a total of 4.01 crores. Versus when you purchase the house which is worth 1.25 crores and assuming that it continues to grow at a rate of 5% per annum, at the end of 20 years, you will have a house whose value is close to 3.3 crores. So when you rent a place, you have much more comfortable cash flows because the amount of rent you pay is much lesser than the amount you will have to pay in terms of EMIs. But when you buy a house, you're not worried about having to pay a rent all your life. Renting a house gives you flexibility because today you can stay in a house for a couple of years and move to a new locality a few years later, or move to a new city or town if that is the kind of lifestyle that you prefer. So renting gives you flexibility, whereas buying the house gives you stability. When you rent the house, the amount you pay for a rent is going to increase at a rate of 6% per annum. So what will happen is by the time you reach year 18, your rent expense, which started off at 30,000 per month, will actually be more than the EMI of 80,000 per month by the time you reach year 18. So in year 18, the rental outflow is actually going to be more than your EMI. Whereas by the time you reach year 20, your EMI is going to become zero and you are not going to have anything to be paid from year 21. Renting a place looks lucrative only and only if you are extremely disciplined and diligent, that whatever money that you save by renting today versus buying, you invest it in financial instruments and build a corpus for yourself over a period of time. So at the end of 20 years, you will land up with a corpus which in our example was an amount of 4.01 crores, which is higher than the value of the house, which was at the end of 20 years an amount of 3.31 crores. Now, one thing to understand here is that we assumed a yearly earning or growth rate of 10% for the portfolio. If you were to be a slightly more aggressive investor and you change the 10% rate to maybe 12 or 13%, you will see that the final value of the corpus that you have is substantially higher than the 4.01 crores that we see here, assuming a average return of 10%. So while renting gives you more comfortable cash flows, because the rent you pay is about 30-35% of the EMI you will have to pay if you were to take on a home loan today, buying a house gives you an asset. It gives you a sense of security and stability, which is going to have a lasting impact not just on yourself as an individual or a couple, but also on your future generations, because it becomes the launch pad for your future generations to start thinking from. If you were to do the math, renting will always look cheaper, but it is looking cheaper today. It will work as an option, or it can be considered as an option over buying the house only and only if you diligently save the cash flows and invest them and not squander them away in your regular expenses. The reason rental looks more attractive is the approximate rent that is charged on a residential property today is about 2 to 3% in India. Whereas the interest that we pay on the home loan that we take is in the range of 7 to 8% today. Because of the differential in the rental yield and the interest rates that we pay, and when we are assuming that the growth in the value of the property is restricted to 5%, which is the long-term average we've seen for residential properties in India, mathematically, renting is always going to look more attractive than buying the property. To help you understand a converse situation, let's move to a country like USA, where the interest rates are much lower and the rental yields are also higher, and where you may have seen your friends buy a house within a year of moving into a new city there. How do they do that? Let's look at the numbers you can expect if you were to be living in one of the cities in USA. So if you were to look at the typical value of a house, which is 250,000 USD, when you decide to rent the house, you will have to pay a rent of close to 1,100 USD per month. And you can expect this rent to increase by 5% per year. Versus when you decide to buy the house, you are expected to make a down payment of only USD 12,500. That is an amount equal to 5% the value of the house. So unlike in India, where the down payment expectations are a minimum of 20%, in the US, by making a down payment of as little as 5% of the value of the property, you can move into that house with the balance 95% being funded by the financial institutions. And given that the prevailing home loan rates in the US are a rate of 2.5%, the EMI that you need to pay for this particular property is an amount of $1,259 per month. So you can see that already the gap between the amount you pay as rent versus the amount you pay when you buy the house as EMI is much more narrower with respect to the same numbers in India. And while in India it is in the 18th year that your rent exceeds the EMI amount, in the US, after 3 years, if you continue to stay on rent, the amount you pay as rent will be $15,281 a year, which is actually more than the amount you will pay as EMI of $15,102. So you can see that in this scenario, when you are in the US, it is clear that it makes more sense to buy a property than to rent a property. The reason for this is because the rental yields are much higher in the US. So when you rent a property, you have to pay a higher rent as a percentage of the value of the property, and the interest rates are also much lower in the US than in India. To summarize this debate of renting versus buying, given that the rental yields are 2 to 3% and the interest rates are between 7 to 8%, renting is always going to look more lucrative than buying a property in India. But having said that, renting will result in a higher cash flow at the end of the 20-year tenure that we use for comparison, only and only if you are diligently saving the rent and investing it. If you choose not to invest that money and actually squander it for your expenses to have a much more better lifestyle, a more luxurious lifestyle, what will happen at the end of 20 years is neither you have a roof on top of your head, neither you have the substantial savings kitty next to you, which you can decide at the end of the 20 years to use either to buy a house or for a kitty which will continue to fund your rental expenses for your lifetime. If you were to choose a renting option, it requires you to be extremely disciplined with your finances, whereas when you buy the house, because you have a liability on your head, that forces you to be disciplined with your finances because you know you have a certain amount to be paid to a third party. If you are a person looking for the flexibility that is associated or that comes with staying on rent, then that is something you can decide to choose, but then you should very, very diligently save the extra cash flows that you keep on a regular basis. If you are a person who's looking for stability and you're ready to buy the house, let's do a deep dive into how you can be smart at making the biggest financial decision of your life. When you decide to purchase a home, there are going to be a number of factors that you need to be aware of before you make the final decision. These factors can be non-financial and financial considerations. Let's first look at a number of non-financial factors which are necessary in helping you make the decision of which house you should buy for yourself. The first factor we look at is the locality, which talks about where do you want to exactly buy the house, which will be a function of what area do you want to stay in. Do you want to stay in North Bangalore, you want to stay in South Bangalore, or would you prefer East Bangalore? The reasons can be apart from cost. Maybe you want to stay close to work, you want to stay close to other family and friends. There can be multiple reasons why you prefer a certain locality versus another locality. Once you narrow down on the locality, the next factor would be the size of the house you're looking at. Are you looking for a 1 BHK or a 2 BHK, or you would prefer to have a 3 BHK, taking into account that you would need a separate room for your kids tomorrow. So the size is the next factor that helps you determine what is the house you should start looking for. The next factor is if you have children or you plan to have children, you would want to take an area which is child friendly. That becomes an important factor in deciding the place that you finalize tomorrow. Apart from that, you look at the security and fire features because you would want a place which is secure for you to move around, whether on your own or with your family members, and you would want it also to have the basic fire safety features in place in case of a eventuality. The next thing you look at is whether you want a parking with the house, whether you want 2 or more parkings, or whether you are somebody who's used to the Uber lifestyle and hence do not need a parking at all. This is also a consideration when looking for a house. Being satisfied about the various astrological aspects around the house is not uncommon today, with the builders themselves advertising their houses as being Vastu compliant. So if this is something which is important for you, you may want to ensure that the house that you're looking for meets these requirements, because this is a purchase that you don't make every other day. You may also want to look at the view you get from the house, as you will be spending a considerable amount of time in the house, in terms of whether you want a garden view, you want a hill view. Different properties are going to give you a different kind of view to enjoy. In addition to these various factors, an underlying factor is the quality of construction of the building, because this is a place you're going to call as your home for the next 50 or more years. In addition to this, there are a number of lifestyle considerations that will help you decide the kind of property you want to look for. If you are someone who's looking for a number of amenities in the society, including whether there is a gym, a playhouse, whether it has a swimming pool, whether it has a garden for you to go for your daily walks, these factors you want to take into account, because this is a purchase that you do not make, or this is a decision that you don't change every second or third year. You may also want to look at the connectivity of the property to nearby schools, hospital, places of worship and shopping malls. You would give different weightage to these different factors depending on what is more important for you. You may also want to look at connectivity to the nearest railway station, metro or airport if you are someone who has to take a flight every other week for work purposes. You would also want to see if the property is close to some of the commercial hubs, so that you don't have to spend too much time traveling between your work and your residence on a daily basis. While there are a numerous number of non-financial factors that need to be taken into account when you start looking for the home you want to purchase, what we've done is we have given you a tool which will help you make this easier. This tool will help you list down the various factors that are important to you and then help you evaluate the multiple properties that you are looking at across these various factors. Now, given that you have a number of factors to look at, to make your life simpler, it will be a very good idea to divide the various factors into certain factors which are completely non-negotiable versus some factors which are optional or you would like to have in your property, but it is not a reason why you would reject the property. For example, if you're looking for a house which is close to your workplace, then that becomes a compulsory factor that you will look for a place which is within a 5-kilometer radius and you will not go outside of that radius. So that becomes a compulsory factor. So if you open up the tool, you will list that down among the mandatory requirements that a property fulfills and put a tick mark next to it. Versus if you are okay with whether the property has a hill view or a garden view or maybe does not have a view, you can put that as a secondary consideration. And that is something which will not have such a big impact when you're evaluating properties, because when you start looking at properties, you will have so many of them to look at with so many pros and cons for each property that this tool is going to help you tick out the factors and then help you choose among which is the property you prefer among the various properties. Similarly, if staying below the 10th floor is a big no, then that goes as a part of the section where you will choose a property only and only if it is above the 10th floor and you do not want to live below the 10th floor. So of the various factors we've discussed, and there would be a lot of other factors which are very individual to each person, you can list down those factors, split them between must-haves versus would love to have, and as and when you evaluate properties, tick each property against these factors. That will make it easier for you to take the final decision. A quote that is apt here is, "A house is made of bricks and mortar, but a home is made by the people who live there." So there are a number of factors which will help you finalize what home you would prefer to stay in, and this tool is only going to help you make your job a little more easier. While you go about listing down the number of non-financial factors which are important for choosing between the various properties, let's shift our focus to the financial factors that you must be aware of, and these are the factors which are going to be discussed in detail through the entire course. Making a home purchase is an extremely capital intensive decision because you're making a commitment of your financial resources that you have today and also of the resources that you will acquire in the future. Because of this, it is extremely important that this is a very thoughtful decision that you make and not just an emotional one. In the following sessions, we will help you find an answer to these questions. What is the actual cost of the home that you plan to purchase? Is it equal to the amount that you see in the billboards advertisements, or is it going to be a much higher amount? The next question is, what is the value of the home you can afford? This will help you arrive at the budget you must set for yourself before you start looking for homes. The next question would be, are you ready to buy a home? Is it that you just need to arrange for the down payment and you're ready to buy a home? Or there are a number of other factors that you must provide for before you take the plunge to buying a house? The next question we will talk about is, what are all the things I need to know about a home loan? Given that the home loan plays such an important role in your purchasing decision, it is important that you understand the various factors that will help you decide what home loan you should go for. The next and the most talked about question is, what are the various tax benefits that are associated with buying a home? Here we will talk about the various tax benefits available to you as an individual or as a couple, and talk about the benefits over the entire tenure of the loan rather than just the first year of the loan. Finally, we will conclude this course by talking about what are the factors you must be aware of, or what are the things you must do after you buy the house. Given the importance of these questions, each of these questions have been designed as a separate session wherein we'll take you through what you can expect when you think of buying a home, what are the various variables that you must take into account, what are the various factors that will affect your decision making, and finally, how you can choose the right option based on your individual personal finances. To sum up the three learnings from this session, buying a home is going to have a long-term impact on your current as well as your future finances, and hence you must be very diligent in your home choosing process. The renting versus buying debate is a choice between flexibility and stability, and is not a choice between living a luxurious or living a non-luxurious life today. Even if you choose to stay on rent, you should be very diligent in saving the extra cash flows and investing them so that you are not left to fend for yourself in your retirement years. And finally, when you buy a home, there are a number of financial and non-financial factors that will eventually influence your final decision. Different factors are going to have different importance for different persons, and you want to pick those factors which are most important to you and help those drive your decision of buying a house. And obviously, you will have to take into account a number of financial considerations which we will discuss in the subsequent sessions of this course.